Hello, everybody, and a happy Sunday. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and I'm excited to introduce Charlene Elderkin to you. She's an amazing lady. I want to tell you a little bit about her. And so Charlene Elderkin is a certified music practitioner who provides therapeutic music with harp and voice at the bedside for hospice patients. She has been involved in death work for 20 years, beginning as a hospice volunteer and then co-founding a community education group, the Threshold Care Circle, to educate and empower families and community members to care for their own dead with or without a funeral director. She is the author and publisher of Where the Tree Falls, The Forest Rises, Stories of Death and Renewal, a compilation of 30 first-person stories. These first-hand accounts illustrate how ordinary people find a way to integrate the death of their beloved into a forever changed life. So welcome, Charlene. I'm so excited. I've got your book here. We're going to talk about it actually, because I've been so enjoyed reading it. But welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate being here, and hello to all the community that I know.
We should tell the community too. You're known as Char on the harp, right?
Char on the harp, and also hospice harpist.
Okay, so you're in our community, and I'm just so glad that you're here. Yeah. I think that you have a lot of wisdom to share. You've been in this for a long time, and in different aspects too, dealing with the death, basically, dealing with death.
The D word.
Yeah, the D word, exactly. And I know that I know that it's not something that the Western area of the world really has an easy time dealing with. And so I'm really glad that you're here to talk about these things and talk about them openly as well. But I wanted to first put your name up, but I wanted to kind of start with your start, with your kind of your childhood, your family, where your spiritual journey kind of begins, and where you got on your spiritual path.
Well, when I'm thinking about this, I have always believed or known there was something beyond this. I don't remember a time in my life where that wasn't something present. And I would sometimes wonder why I believed, because I had no other, not like I was seeing things or hearing things or any of those kind of clairs, but just my own inner sense of there being something. And I was raised in a Catholic family to start out with, and I have 10 siblings. Until I was age 12. And then my family converted to LDS, or Mormon church. And I spent about 27 years there. And when that ended, I explored shamanism, energy work. I have a daughter who's into Wicca, so I've been to witch camps. I have a daughter who's a Buddhist, so I learned about that. I learned about anthroposophy from the Waldorf schools where my kids went. I've always been had this mystical side, and an explorer. I was kind of explorer. Even when I was LDS, I was exploring things that would now be called New Age, but didn't have a name yet. Right. So there's always been that side of me, and I guess what I wanted to do is tell the story of my spiritual path as it relates to this topic. And so when I was 20, my firstborn daughter, Heather Dawn, died about 14 hours after birth.
Oh,
And this was, this is, I'm young in life and I realize anybody can die at any time. So
right.
that's just a very part. And my faith gave me a lot of comfort. Um, but what was interesting at the very same time that this was happening was Raymond Moody's book came out, Life After Life, and all the near-death experiences. So I was just really drawn to all those books, and I read every book that came out at that time until now. There's just way too much. You can't keep up, But at
Right.
that time, that was my focus was, and in the Mormon community, a lot of spiritual experiences are shared among people,
Mm.
and so that again reinforced this feeling of presence. And then, so when I was in my shaman phase, I traveled. I had a particular shaman teachers, and I traveled to Peru and to Chile. And I'd come back from this expedition from Chile, just feeling empowered and open-hearted. And right after that, I accompanied a high school trip to Chiapas in Mexico, and we were going on a school building mission. And then on the way to traveling, which was a long travel, driving to the Mexican border, crossing the border on foot, getting on a bus to Mexico City, finding the other Americans that were going along, another long bus ride into the mountains of Chiapas. And while we were on journey, there was a massacre. There were paramilitaries that were shooting up the villages, and people were killed. So we landed in this war zone
Oh,
with these high school students, and so
ouch.
our mission became more humanitarian focused because there was no way to do school building under those conditions.
Right.
And there was a point in the journey where they felt the community where we were staying had not become safe, and they had to take us out into the mountains in the middle of the night. Um, when I was riding back on the bus to take us out of there, I was just sobbing because I thought, I get to go home, but they have to stay there. And I felt this immense survivor's guilt. And what happened to me spiritually was I just thought, I don't know how this works anymore. How can God answer my prayers for the safety of my students? But those people were gunned down in church.
Mm.
And I couldn't make sense of it. The only thing that I was always used to being able to find a silver lining to my trials and tribulations, but the only silver lining I eventually found was that by participating in a small amount with the suffering of people, that I was more connected to humanity through that.
Mm.
But for a while, I stopped any spiritual practice. I didn't read any books. I wasn't doing anything. I started rebuilding my life. I met the man Nathan, who's now my husband. And as I was reflecting on this, I was asking myself, well, when did I start to come back? It wasn't like I didn't believe. It's just like, I don't understand this. And so I'm just going to take a break for a while. And what brought me back was my mother was dying, and participating with her in that process, helping my sisters lived with her during this. Two of my sisters did, and I came in once a week to stay with her and do family history and look at pictures and that whole process, which is some of that story is in my book, and then being there when she died was a transformation. It changed my life path. Everything I'm doing now is from that time. It's from that time. The life that is present in the presence of death. And so I got curious. I became a hospice volunteer because of the great support that we had in hospice, and I wanted to be a part of that. And then I started wondering about other things, like how can we help relieve the suffering that people may have around death that's not drugs. That's what are other ways, because hospice does a great deal of support with many ways.
Mhm.
But I was looking for other ways, something that I could participate in. And then I also thought, well, what about after death? The after death care, because I knew there were a couple of people in our community that had cared for their dead at home, and there's spiritual traditions where you have vigil with the body for 3 days, because during those 3 days, it's believed that the spirit is gradually making its exit. And so that's a sacred time. And so I did research on that, and I co-founded the Threshold Care Circle, and we got educated and started educating our community. And so that's how that part of my spiritual journey, transformed. So with my daughter's death, I was more interested in what happens next, but now I got curious about the dying process itself and supporting in that, and then helping families in that immediate aftermath. And then through my participation in those groups, that led me, I learned about the music. Someone made a presentation about music at the bedside for hospice patients, and so I explored that. And it's through talking to people during this time and just realizing how life affirming these stories are that we tell each other, that usually people only tell each other around a death, and then we don't talk about it anymore. That gave me the idea that, well, wouldn't it be nice to have a book where people share those stories?
Well, and your book, it is wonderful. It is a wonderful book, and I'm so glad that you did this, and it's also so interesting to me how, because my huge changes in the way I thought of abilities and what comes next was also ushered in by the death of my dad, a parent. The death of my dad, that was the first clear premonition I had, was around his passing. And then the first spirit that I saw with my own eyes was my dad. So that kind of led me, just like you, kind of a series of curiosities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know with doing readings that so often people's guides say to follow your curiosity, follow what sparks you, follow what you're enthusiastic about knowing. That will lead you. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did. You were just very interested in helping, right? But that curiosity, that kind of fascination was there about this, about all of it, it sounds like.
Yeah.
For you, right? So I wanted to ask you a couple of things about your book. And I did want to ask you, you kind of said why you wrote it, or why you decided to kind of compile all these stories and write your own part of the book. But how long did it take you to do this?
That's a good question, because there was a number of years where I was just thinking about it. And you know how spirit does this sometimes when you have an idea that you can't get rid of?
They're very persistent.
Very persistent.
That's the way to know that your spirit guides and the universe is talking to you, is it keeps coming back.
Yeah.
It just keeps coming back. Yeah.
And I've done this when I thought of Threshold Care Circle about creating that group. It was like an idea I put on the shelf because I wasn't sure I wanted to start something new, and so I just waited to see if it was still there. But with the book, I did talk to people, and I started talking to people in the deaf community about this idea, and people were encouraging. And then I started going to our local community started a writers group, so I started going to that. One of the things was finding stories, and the other thing, but in order to ask for stories, I had to be specific about what kind of stories I was looking for. And so I thought, well, if I could come up with the title, then that would help me. And so I started looking through poetry and different things, and I found this title from a poem by Wendell Berry. And I knew Wendell Berry from a poem that I didn't know who he was at the time, but I had this poem in my purse for years about to go into the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark. Go without sight and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. And I carried that for a long time. And then it turns out that my husband knew who Wendell Berry was, and he was actually many things. But I was going through a book of collections of his poetry, and I found this, and I want to read it. Because this is part of a longer poem that's describing a funeral in a country setting. There is a grave, too, in each survivor, because they're standing around the grave. By it, the dead one lives. He enters us, a broken blade, sharp, clear as a lens or mirror, and he comes into us helpless, tender as the newborn enter the world. Great is the burden of our care. We must be true to ourselves. How else will he know us? Like a wound, grief receives him. Like graves, we heal over and yet keep as part of ourselves the severe gift. By grief, more inward than darkness, the dead become the intelligence of life. Where the tree falls, the forest rises. There is nowhere to stand but in absence, no life but in that fateful light. I was blown away by this, and I thought that's what I want, that where the tree falls. Because in the forest, there are certain tree seeds that won't germinate unless they're hit by sunlight. And the only way that tree will have life is when a tree falls to give it light. And so what is this? And what I was finding in meaningful about stories is, like in my own story, my mother's death created this opening for this new life for me. And so and I think part of that is, people play certain roles in our lives, and when they die, then there's this absence, and what fills that absence, and what germinates in that space of that fateful light, in that standing in that absence, as the poem says. And so with that clarity, then I created these little business cards that had the title of the book on it and where to email me. And I started, the internet was not what it was back then, as this is, 2009, 10, I started soliciting them. So, when I'd go to events or participate in things, I also did a book proposal. So when I was learning about what you're supposed to do before you get published is find an agent and publisher, and you write them a book proposal. And so I did all this research, and I read other books to see, how my book, what my audience was, and, how my book would fit into that. And so I'm passing out these, and I found publications that I thought, oh, maybe there's somebody here in this publication. So I put a few ads around. So, and now I look at the book, and there's some people I have no idea how I found them. Some of them I recognize. I had quite a few from the Threshold community, from all over, and and people who knew people whatever. And so I started putting those stories out, and I had a really clear vision at this point. I wanted the book to tell the story in the first person stories, have them
Mhm.
tell their stories. I saw a number of books where it was someone else telling other people's stories. And besides not wanting to do that much work, I also felt like the story started to sound the same because they really were coming from one point of view. I wanted a variety of relationships, not just parents. I wanted children, grandchildren, friends, whatever relationships that we have. So we'd have a variety of perspectives and across a variety of spiritual beliefs, so that the book would be, could reach whatever, you know, we could all learn more from this wider variety of. And I wanted every story to have a photograph,
Mm.
because that was important to me. I was a graphic designer, and so the feel and the look of the book was important to me. And ultimately, I tried a bit to find a agent or publisher, but my book was so unique, it didn't fit in any genre, and plus it's really
Mhm.
an anthology. So I decided to self-publish, and at that point, it was Create Space, which is now something else. So I did hire an editor, Carolyn Washburn, who ended up contributing one of her stories to the book. I hired someone to do the book design because though I was a graphic designer, I wasn't a book designer. And so I wanted it to be worthy of the content, in the look and feel of it as well. And so ultimately, I think it took me a couple of years of actively soliciting stories, and then another couple of years to go through the whole process um, of the book proposal and the editing and all that, putting that part together. So yeah, anybody who does a book, it is has got my deep respect. As it is a really big process. It's a big deal.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that we can self-publish now
Yeah,
because it brings to us so many books that we might not otherwise be able to see or to read or to experience. So that's wonderful.
yeah.
Um, I want to talk about a couple of the stories in your book. I
Mhm.
did want to acknowledge everybody in the chat they're talking about their own, anniversaries of people passing, their own experience of death and the dying and their own families' deaths. And I just want to acknowledge that because they're kind of like it's timely. We need to talk
Yeah,
about these things, and it's so healing to talk
yeah.
about this stuff and to know we all share this. We share life, but we also share death. It's something that we share.
That's kind of the best thing about when I've done events and talks around the book is the conversations that happen and the
Yeah.
people sharing stories. I think people say that we are afraid to talk about death, but I think we really want to talk about it. We just need
Mhm.
permission. We just need a space that feels safe and permission.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Um, so the one, I think it is the first story actually in the book, but it's a story about a I think it's called Trees and Fathers.
Yeah.
And it's about a daughter trying to find out family information, basically before her dad passes, and trying to understand, but kind of also connect with him through their love of trees and their love of the woods. Why do you think so many of us wait so long to ask about family histories and to wait to so long to connect with our heritages and things like that? And also, what is the significance of trees for you when it comes to life and death? I mean, you talked about the seeds and kind of the life growing out of death, right? Basically, and do you have other? Do trees have another significance for you? because they're all throughout the book, right?
Yeah, it's the poem that came to me, and I don't know that I have anything more significant than that turned out to be the best metaphor. Of course, trees, we think of the tree of life.
Right. So,
And recently, it's kind of fun you ask this, because recently, as I've been working with trying to work with my own energy and get more in touch with it, and as I call in the energy of earth, it has come to me as a tree. And so as I bring in the energy of earth, it's the tree of life, coming through me, and then its branches reaching up. So that's really interesting that you asked that, because it's just kind of a recent thing for me. You know, outside of that, it was, like all of nature. And I was able to visit the redwood forest outside of Acadia, California, on a trip I was making to see my daughter, and I was just amazed. This is a city park, and it's full of redwood trees, and that's where the picture that's on the cover comes from.
oh, really? I didn't realize it was the redwoods. Yeah, it's amazing to see those redwoods up close because they are huge. You just have no idea how big they are until you're standing next to one, and it's like, oh my gosh. And the question about why people wait so long, why do you think that is? Because we did the same thing with my dad. He would always tell stories, and we knew a lot about our family because we were LDS also. So they had done a lot of genealogy, but we really wanted to encourage him to write his stories down or put them on a tape recorder, and he never did. Only parts of them. So we have some stories that we remember, and so we'll tell them over again. But I do wonder why we don't do this more, and why we wait till the last.
Yeah,
till the
well, I
end.
think if someone's might not be ready to reflect on their life. I know one of the things with my mom is she dictated her life history, and then one of my jobs with her was to go through and talk about those and make sure that what was said and in the dictation was how she wanted to have it represented. And I published this after she died. And so I think there's a point of life where, I don't know, I think when I got into my 50s, all these random things that didn't seem connected, I couldn't understand, seemed to come together. Like I could see the story now. So there just might be a point in our life where we don't see the story yet.
Right.
There are those stories. And I think when you're young too, your job is to individuate. So it's about how you are different from your family.
Right.
And as you get older, you take great comfort in how you are like them, and what are the traditions what are the traditions that they participated in that you now participate in as part of remembering them. So I think it's a life cycle thing.
Well, and I loved the story about your mom, and she sounds like she was super mom. She really does. I mean, she was canning, and she was doing quilts, and she was telling her story, and she was also, so you could tell that she loved life, right?
Mm-hmm.
She loved life, but she was so graceful and accepting of her death as well. Where do you think that grace came from for her?
I as I observed her in her life, I know she learned from the deaths of other people. She saw people not talk about it, try to pretend that someone wasn't dying. And she is just too practical a person, no nonsense. And so her openness, I think, was just part of that, of having learned from watching other people. And just like, so it was really great for us because I walked in that one day when she was tired and she was working on a quilt, and then she says, and someone on the phone is asking her, "What are you doing?" And I just hear the answer, "I'm finishing this quilt so I can die." So yeah, she was very practical, but what was, she was always a doer. And I think she kept busy in some way, she kept busy to keep from too much reflection, like sometimes
Mhm,
we do.
mhm.
And now she had this time to slow down and reflect. And that's what was new, is to be with her in this process of reflection, of reflecting and making meaning at the end of her life.
Right. Yeah, she seemed like an incredible, and I just cracked up when she was in the car driving to hospice singing, I'm gonna die with
Die with
curly
curly
hair.
hair. Your hair had fallen out with her treatment, and so now it had come back curly, and so she's like, yeah.
Oh, what a wonderful lady she sounds like.
Mm,
And then later on in the book, I think it's closer to the end, but it's about there's a story called Nurse Log,
yeah.
a radical departure. And there's a story of an artist who is inspired by the graceful passing of his younger brother. It's such a tearjerker. I cried through that one, but
Oh,
to carve, but he's so inspired that he carves this art piece, symbolizing kind of life and the afterlife. And for you, death seems to have inspired not only your writing but also music. And so,
mhm.
why do you think that death can be such an inspiration for so many artists? What do you think that is? Yeah.
I think, that's a good question. One of the things that I have mentioned before is that people play a certain role in our lives and in death, and we have to find in that absence, we have to find that part of ourselves. So we can't replace our moms or our dads. We might find mothering energy somewhere else, but we have to find our internal, you know, mother
Mhm.
and father. And I think the creative process is just it's so connected with spirit,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So if you want to tap into spirit, you tap into your creativity. And so I think that's and then of course it's so emotional, and what a better
Yes.
way to connect with our emotions than through our creativity in whatever
ab-
ways those are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I could so appreciate, and it reflected both the passing of my mom and also my aunt, her sister. They both we had music for them at the end
Mhm.
when they were passing out. Now my mom wanted to hear Engelbert Humperdinck, but my but my aunt had a lot of church music, and it was around Christmas time, so a lot of Christmas
Uh-huh.
hymns and things like
Yeah.
that. And your mom, you guys went around the piano and sang,
Yeah.
and I know that it is, and because I wanted to talk about your um, learning to play the harp, right, and playing and playing and singing for people. And I think that music is such a beautiful, it's such a, what is it? There is a bridging there between this life and the next that has to do with tone and
Mhm.
vibration,
Yeah.
right? To me, it's the perfect segue
Yeah.
into the afterlife, right?
Right. Yeah. And this kind of work can be done with n more than the harp as an instrument, but the first program I went to was for harp only, and then I went into a different one, but because I was thinking I was gonna go to this program with harp only, I took up the harp and I worked really diligently on it, um, and I'm really grateful for that because the harp has this tone and resonance
Mm,
that, and it doesn't speak to everybody. Not all patients want to have harpist. There's still some people that associate harp with I don't know whatever they associate it with, but it's doesn't connect with them. And so we have another uh, therapeutic musician who plays guitar, and so we get referrals for patients. But I think there is this resonance, and the harp has been very healing for me as I've learned and worked with it. So there is this resonance and vibration and the overtones that you get in harmonic music. I am a harmonic musician. Some people are more melody oriented, but I've always heard the harmonies. And I've always thought of my personality as being harmonious in the way that if there's a tone that isn't out, there's a note that's missing, then I want to sing that note because the full chord is not there. And I've seen myself in discussion groups. I can sense that there's something that needs to be said that no one else is saying. And so then it's me, I'm going to say it,
Right.
So I really feel like it's music is really the thread in my life that has been with me on my spiritual path. Yeah.
And I can so relate to that. I can so relate to
Yeah,
that. And even the harmony, I can completely relate with that. I wanted to Craig said that his grandpa wanted his 1940s music before he passed.
Yeah.
Same. It really is so, it's so comforting to me to hear music and to have that.
My dad was a musician for most of his life, and the funeral home was able to take the recordings from his tapes and transfer them so that we got them digitally. And they were playing, my dad singing and playing. His organ was playing at the visitation, and I was so happy to hear his voice and his singing, and I'm like dancing, dancing with myself, listening to him. It was the sweetest, part of that. Yeah.
Oh, how fun! And Peace Mama says, this is just such a timely show. My daughter and I are coming up on a very painful first anniversary of loss. This is very healing. Thank you for your love, healing, and light. And I will share. What do you suggest for people on anniversaries? Do you have an idea what people can do to celebrate the life of someone on an anniversary?
This is something that, was not in our tradition. The Jewish people have specific traditions, and I think the Buddhists do too, about what you do at certain anniversaries. And one thing I wish I would have known, because my firstborn daughter, Heather, died, and I will mention that my oldest daughter, Amanda, wrote a story in the book about Heather's death. So her which was very enlightening to me, understanding how the child after the child that died perceives loss for the sibling they never knew. And I talked about Heather more when Amanda and my oldest two were young. But then as I got, I ended up having 6 children, and I think we talked about her less. And boy, I wish I would have had lit a candle, told the story on her birthday every year, because the younger children didn't really hear that story much, right. I think. And so I think it's really good because another thing that happens in the community when you don't understand about death is you can stop talking about the dead person because you don't want their survivors to feel bad, like they'd forgotten they were dead, And it's very comforting to say the names of your dead. And so, I would honor that first anniversary. However, one way that I think it is a community can honor their dead, what we used to do at the Threshold Care Circle meetings, is to light a candle and to sit and contemplate the members of our community that are passed. And if you felt kind of like in a Quaker way, you call out the names of your dead. This has been done in our community around the Day of the Dead. It is a good time to do this.
Yeah.
Have some kind of simple ceremony with lighting a candle and calling the names of your dead. Say their names. And if you don't want to say it publicly, you can just say it inside. But it's a very powerful ritual to just
Oh, it's beautiful.
just say their names. Yeah.
It reminds me of a saying that is, you die twice. You die first when you die,
Mhm.
and then you die the second time when your name is spoken for the last time.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of that, and I think that's that is how we keep them alive. You keep
Yeah.
them here, a part of them with us, right? And also, and I am sure that if you had a ceremony like that, they would be there.
Yep.
They'd be waiting for their name to be. So they'd be so excited about that.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out, Linda Lopez said that her husband has stage 3 lung cancer. She's asking for prayers. They're going to find out on May 5th how successful his treatment has been. So we will pray for Linda's husband, Ernesto. Okay. So blessings to you guys, Linda and Ernesto.
Here's one thing I wanted to mention about, because sometimes people have this idea that being in death work or being in working in hospice in that kind of way must be depressing, you know? And I want to say that the accompanying someone through this process, when a family or a person is well supported in this process of either their dying process or the after death, that period is so full of life. It is life on steroids. It is your heart opening up to love. If you're feared, that fear, I mean, everything is like amplified. And so it's full of life, and it can be full of great meaning. And so when people come onto hospice, they're not giving up on life. They're deciding they want quality of life. That wants to be their focus. And so I just want to say that when we're talking about that I am so blessed by the people that I play for. And, sometimes they'll say, I don't know how you can do this work. And it's like, well, I'm doing it, and I'm not doing it in the context of my family member, but although I do, if asked, but that I am blessed by being able to participate because of the willingness to be present to death. I've gotten the backstage pass to the most intimate moments in people's lives. What is more intimate than death? We all are born, we all die, but somehow we think that, we don't want to talk about it because it might happen.
Right.
We don't care for it because that means we think we might die. Duh, we're all, we're all.
Yep.
So the more that we can talk about it, and talk about it when we go to a funeral, what did you like about that? What didn't you like? And think about how you want your family to honor you. Oh, and do you have your healthcare power of attorney? The things that take away the fear are being curious and asking yourself those questions, and then sharing them. Don't be afraid to share what you're feeling.
I love that. And I agree. I've had the most profound spiritual experience, spiritual growth, and also amazing spiritual experiences at both the passings of people or the run up to it, or at funerals. I've had some of the most amazing spiritual experiences and leaps in spiritual growth in those experiences.
My definition of a good funeral is if you come away knowing that person better than you've ever known them. Because you know that person in their growth. I know my mother as a mother. I didn't know what she's like as a friend or a coworker.
Right.
And so if you come away knowing who that person was more fully, then that's a good funeral to me. And also some good music.
um, oh, this is interesting. Craig says, at the Army hospital, when I was getting well, the veterans would pass between 2 and 3 a.m. The next morning, the beds would be empty. I'd ask nurses, and they'd always say he went home with a knowing smile. And I think, yeah, that's beautiful, Craig. Thank you for sharing that. And I did hear a hospice nurse one time. It was in a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but she said that she loved the hospice system because she said she worked as a nurse at first, and then she went and worked as like in a hospital, and then went to a hospice to be a hospice volunteer. And she said that when you pass in the hospital, everything becomes more technical, and when you pass in hospice, everything becomes more spiritual. And I thought that was such an interesting. And I've had, family pass in both circumstances, and from my own experience, it is absolutely true, because the more in a hospital, the more that happens, the more they're hooking you up to more things. Yeah. In hospice, there is such a it's just a more organic process, ushering you towards death rather than keeping you here, as long as possible, no matter what.
Yes, it's about quality of life. And so there's a whole team. And I wish our healthcare system was built around this way more, because every person has a doctor, they have nurses assigned to them. There's the chaplain, there's a social worker, there's a pharmacist. They all sit together around a table once a week and make sure that everything's okay with what's going on. And in the meantime, visits are happening. So I think it's, and then of course, in our area, we don't have a hospice inpatient facility. So my hospice patients are generally at home or in a nursing home or assisted living. Sometimes someone is in the hospital and goes on hospice because they've chosen palliative care instead of curative care, and they don't make it out of the hospital. And I played in those situations a couple of times, but mostly it's in these different places. And and so they all can, with the attitude of knowing that, of wanting people to have the best experience that they can have, that they can be free of pain enough to relax and let go, and have their symptoms managed. And then the support for the family is there with the chaplain and the social worker, and very respectful, very respectful.
Wow, amazing. And I just wanted to bring this and be in grace. I have been a hospital chaplain for 22 years, and I totally relate to what a great blessing and honor it is to be on that journey with people and be present when they cross.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, interesting. So Lynn says, one of my sons has, since he was 2 years old, wanted to work with older people. And now he talks about the beauty and optimism of people at the end of life, which is wild to me.
Wow.
How interesting. What an old soul, right?
Yeah, right.
I think somebody said that too. Yeah, Lily Rose says, oh my gosh, he must be an old soul. But that's what I wonder too, is maybe these younger generations coming in, especially the ones who had to witness COVID at such a young age, and so many people passing, and it kind of being kind of random and just kind of all around us, if they will have a different view and maybe a more open view about death and dying.
Yeah, I don't know. I think as a culture, we haven't begun to process COVID.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of behavior that's happening in people being more antagonistic towards each other or certain things. I think that's come out of that. It's
I think
a
you're right.
defense mechanism around that.
Was trauma, right? I mean, we all
Right.
went through a trauma, right? And everybody processes and deals with trauma differently. And you're right. I don't think there has been, any kind of mental health, operation to get people to be able to, figure out how to process what they
and our healthcare workers, what they went through.
Absolutely.
And I think like right now, there's situations where it would really be smart to mask, and people get harassed for masking. And I think that's trauma, that makes them think, oh, we're back there, instead of thinking, oh, this is just a useful thing that I can do to protect myself. It becomes this symbol of this trauma, and it creates all this anxiety and anger in people. And so, we've got a ways to go with that.
Yeah.
So I thought, maybe it's time to do some processing around death. This book has been out for quite a while, and during COVID, I didn't say anything about it at all. I thought this is all too, we're too much in the thick of it,
right,
to process it, and maybe now we can start to do some processing around this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so needed. And Fran says, do souls sometimes leave the body before the actual time of death? I think so often. So often. I know from my own experience, I've even had people that were very, very far along in Alzheimer's. And when I would tune into them, I would see them like leaving their body at different times, sometimes during the night or things like that. I remember one woman, she would leave at night and dance with her husband, who was on the other side, but I could see it happening. So I absolutely believe that. What do you think?
Well, it was interesting when my dad was dying, this was a couple of years ago. I was camped out on the floor next to his bed. He was living with my sister, and I woke up. I was supposed to get up at a certain time to give him some tincture medicine, and I couldn't hear him breathing, and I thought, did he go? And I got up, and he was still there, but man, it didn't seem like he was there. And so even when Cindy came in the room and we were, turning him on his side, his body was like dead weight.
Right.
And like it just didn't feel like he was there, even though the body was still there. And then later on, he actually came to, and he went out, traveling in the mountains and wherever he was, but, I definitely felt like there's a difference in the body, when you're helping someone in bed and turning and things, they'll help you,
Right.
This was dead weight. So it was really like, man, it didn't seem like he was in his body. Yeah.
Right. This has been such so interesting, Charlene. Thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to just kind of end with this last question, which is, what as a last thought from you, what do you want people to know about? What would you hope people take away from, and what would you like them to know about the process of death and dying?
It reminds me of the quote from Ram Dass where he says, death is perfectly safe. And then there's the Woody Allen quote that said, I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens. So when I approached you about having this conversation, Kim, I thought what might be useful tool for people to do is to think, what is it that I'm afraid of on the topic of death, and get curious. Because, poke around a little bit. I found my reaction was, I'm not afraid of dying and I'm not afraid of death, but I'm afraid of leaving things undone that I'm meant to do.
Right, right.
So that's my biggest anxiety. So, well, if I get busy and get them done, then I can relax and then I can go anytime. So find what it is. Are you afraid if you're afraid of dying from a specific disease or dying in pain, look up Hospice Nurse Julie on YouTube. She's on TikTok. She has great videos. She goes through all the different ways to die, what to expect in the dying process, to really get educated. Because when you get curious and get educated, there's less fear. So I just would suggest that get curious, see where in you death creates fear and anxiety, and see if you can get little educations to relieve that, because only when you fully accept your death are you free to live.
Oh,
that's the great irony of it, is that that's where freedom lies, when there's no fear left.
I absolutely agree with that. And I've said before that, when you're not afraid of death, that you live differently. You take more risks. You really feel like you're free to go, free to live. So I totally agree with that. And I love that. I love that idea too, about kind of moving into that fear, because fear is just the ego, right? Our eternal self knows everything's fine. It's the ego part of us that wants that's fear. That's where fear is in the ego. So I love the idea of facing it and moving towards it, and thereby letting it go. Right.
And the other thing is facing the death of someone's dying close to you. If your fear and anxiety is going to keep them here longer, and they suffer longer because of that, that's not what you want.
Right.
You want them to be free, to relax and let go. So look at your own fears around what happened, because my baby died in the beginning. I knew that anybody could die at any time. And I would go through little scenarios in my mind. What do I do if this child dies? What do I do if my husband dies? These are thoughts that I would have in a very practical way. And so that was just kind of my way of coping with the unexpected, because the unexpected deaths are, for me, the hardest. But so I just look at how you're feeling about your own death and how you're feeling about the death of people that you don't want to lose. And can you let them have the freedom to go when it's their time?
I think that's such great advice. And I just want to end with Tony. Thank you, Tony. Life happens between our first and last breath. Enjoy it. Last breath. I think she said last breath, but yes, and our last breath. Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much, Charlene, for coming on. I just appreciate it so much. And I have all of your information in the description, so people can find your book and they can find you, and I've got your email there and all of your social media, so they can find
my YouTube.
Your YouTube. And what is your YouTube?
I gave it to you in that information.
What is the name of your channel?
I think it's Char on the harp.
Okay. Just so people know, they can look for it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so
much.
much.
If you put Charlene Elderkin on YouTube, I think I'm the only Charlene Elderkin on there.
Okay. And it is in the description. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charlene. I really appreciate it.
It's just such an uplifting conversation. Don't we all feel good?
We do all feel good. I always feel good on our with everybody sitting here. It's such a good energy on Sunday. It's so fun. I just love it. So thank you all so much for showing up and hanging out with us. I really appreciate it. And we will talk again. I will be gone next Sunday, so I will see you the Sunday after that, because I'll be traveling to the UK next Sunday, but I will see you guys after. Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you,
We'll talk again, everyone. Bye-bye.